Good morning and welcome to the Point. This morning's show is a bit of a departure. We're still talking about politics and about policy, but we're going to be highlighting something that we don't often see in Washington: bipartisanship. Now, in fairness, a lot of things in Washington do happen on a bipartisan basis, but what we hear most about is the bickering between Republicans and Democrats. Well, this morning, the chairman of one of the most powerful committees in Washington, Congressman Fred Upton from St. Joseph, and a Democratic colleague, Representative Diana DeGette from Colorado, are talking about a proposal that they're trying to make law. It's a proposal that could impact everybody in the United States and beyond. And this morning you'll hear from them about their bipartisan effort. This is an interesting process because the issue that the two of you have taken on is something that potentially touches every person in the United States, perhaps globally. Because what you're talking about is changing a bureaucracy. And you've both been in Washington long enough to know how difficult that is. And even more difficult, maybe, is changing the mindset of that bureaucracy to start getting cures to the marketplace more quickly. If I can, Representative, let me start with you. How did you develop this idea? Because at once it seems like common sense, but it also looks like a heavy lift.
Well, Fred came to me, actually, and he knew about some of the work that I had done with biomedical research. And you can ask him, but Fred really wanted to do something big, to think about the way we do biomedical research for the 21st century. And so we started investigating it, having hearings and roundtables and discussions. And what we learned very, very quickly is that there was a lot of consensus, not just on the outside, but within the bureaucracy, about the way things needed to change to make biomedical research work better.
One of the things in the video that's posted on both of your websites, and you can talk a little bit about this, is the change in the rest of the world versus the way that we still get medical cures, medical practices, procedures, protocols approved and out into the real world, and there's a pretty big disconnect.
Well, there is, and we actually, last summer, I actually sent a number of members, Republican and Democrat, and staff to Europe as well as to Asia. What are they doing that we're not? And we learned a lot of things. I mean, just the venture capital for companies here in this country is right up 50% just in the last 5 or 6 years, because the approvals overseas is just so much faster. So if you want to invest in something, the idea was, why are we doing it in the U.S. when we can get it done overseas? We'll just build them over there, and with the tax code and everything else. And so how do we change that mindset? So that's when we really got, I think, a lot of good ideas, and not only trying to bring those back, but also really sitting down with former officials, whether it be at the Food and Drug Administration or the NIH, the administration, obviously industry types, as well as all of the disease groups. In fact, Diana and I this week met with a whole number of different disease groups, from diabetes to Alzheimer's to cancer to you name it, to cystic fibrosis, to get their input, their thoughts, because this is a bipartisan approach as we try to change the way that the ship has been going. But drug approvals, device approvals, they were just the same. It was just 40 or 50 years, you'll be there, just spend the money, and it just keeps going. We've had such advances in science that we got to take advantage of that to really change the process. And I think that this legislation will do that.
One of the things you told me a few weeks ago when we talked, I believe we were over at one of the Stryker companies, and you were talking about, I don't think surprise, I think I might have been surprised, but I think you were pleased because you said, and as you referred to as well, a lot of these folks within the bureaucracy, or some who had been there and come out, actually signed up pretty quickly with you to say, yeah, we need to change this.
Well, we do. Last week, I was over in Detroit, Cancer Center. They've been working on a device for better breast cancer detection. They've been working on it since 2001. They're hoping it'll be ready to be approved in a couple more years. But, oh my goodness, I mean, you see this, I mean, they're looking for people to be freely tested because they just got to get the trials to get there. It should have been approved 5 years ago, maybe even more. And that's the frustration that not only Stryker has, but all these different companies, researchers, hospitals, et cetera, when they think they have a good idea, it is a long time, and then often the manufacturer goes overseas because they just such slow approvals here. So that's going to change with this legislation.
But you know, here's the thing. The U.S. is still the gold standard in terms of safety and efficacy of biomedical research. So a lot of our researchers and a lot of our allies around the world, they still look to the NIH for the basic research. They still look to the FDA for the drug and device approval. So the other countries have sort of had it both ways. They have the U.S. to look for that gold standard, but then they can just move things through much more quickly. So this is what 21st Century Cures is going to give us. It's going to give us still those very high standards that the United States has, but then an ability to expedite the way we do clinical research.
One of the things that you talked about in the video that I watched is that everything else around us has started to move at lightning speed. And certainly that is true for research, but not the approval process. But there are other issues. You just talked about the safety and the ethical nature of it. But what do you hear from those groups that represent different diseases that have, they all want results, they all want cures, but maybe not all working at the very same direction? What kind of response are you getting for some of those stakeholders?
Oh, well, people are just excited about the potential for things like streamlining the IRBs, the clinical trials, for having central data registries so that you can have personalized medicine and you can really target diseases that affect individuals. People are getting really excited about that.
So IRBs, so that's the research that different universities and other researchers do, and so rather than having separate protocols for each little siloed unit, you can have a University of Denver communicate with Michigan or Notre Dame or Stanford, and really streamline that process and even get more numbers, speed it up.
What do you hear from the universities? Because I have to believe that they are probably as anxious, perhaps, as some of these folks that are trying to find cures for those diseases.
They're very excited. They really are very excited. And last year we did a roundtable. We did about almost 30 or so, maybe even more, when you count individual members that actually did a roundtable in their own district. So we did one here in Kalamazoo last fall, had Grand Rapids, we had other events here. Diana did an event in Denver. We saw them in Texas and California and other places in addition to Washington. So, as you get people from around the country, and you always want them structured so that you've got lots of different voices that are helping us as we listen to move legislation forward. We've got a lot of good ideas about what we ought to do, and again, using former directors of these agencies who said, man, here's what, if we had only known this, here's how you can help us get this thing done.
You talk about silos, you obviously got the bureaucracy, which you've been dealing with. You have the folks with the vested interest from those disease groups, as you put it. You've got universities and researchers. What about the frontline on the ground medical folks? What are you hearing from them? Because ultimately, that doc, that nurse, that practitioner that's been out there wants to make sure that whatever this newest protocol is something that is going to do the right thing. I mean, that's the ethics that you talked about and the safety you talked about.
Well, a lot of the medical practitioners are really frustrated because they feel like they have patients, they feel like they could have this personalized medicine for them. They feel like they could have treatments that could work for them if only they knew. And so if you could have that kind of research being done and you could get more treatments and cures, you could have more choices for them, for their patients, and tailored at each patient's genome, then that's very exciting to the practitioners.
One of the things that we at this table are all aware of is that we as a society have a big group of baby boomers who are about to go into retirement or quasi-retirement, but we're also going to become huge consumers of healthcare. And we have Alzheimer's, as you mentioned, and other diseases that we're still struggling with trying to figure out. Is this, at least in part, hopefully an answer to start looking at some of those for quality of life for folks?
Oh, I think so for sure. And as we sit down with, Alzheimer's in just a few years, I mean, unless we find a way to slow it down or cure it, it's going to cost us trillions of dollars, trillions. So there is a major, there ought to be a greater emphasis on things like that, particularly, earlier biomarkers. I mean, a whole number of different things that, today we might be able to utilize that yesterday we couldn't.
And when you talk to groups, and for those of us who have loved ones who have experienced some of these diseases, your first response is, yes, let's get this moving. How much of this is the kind of legislation you're talking about, and how much of it is that very thing that you're talking about, the cost and maybe the subsequent investment that needs to be made, not just on the private sector, but maybe at a public sector?
At the end of the day, we're going to be saving a lot of money because instead of people dying earlier or very expensive treatments perhaps to accommodate whatever illness they might have, whether it be dialysis or whatever hurdles by being able to resolve this, we're much better off. And the secondary issue is, of course, we're going to create jobs too. So by bringing the research here, and we're going to have I think a pretty significant increase for the NIH, National Institutes of Health, in terms of health research money. We're going to get those jobs back that we've lost overseas, which is only going to help us as a nation.
And I think the two go hand in hand, really. You begin to find treatments and cures for people, and that does save more money in the long run, but the effect on families and individuals is beyond comparison.
When we come back, there is a certain irony that I discuss with the two members of Congress, and that is a Republican and a Democrat working on one item together that involves health care. After all, it was the Affordable Care Act that has been the center of so much controversy between Republicans and Democrats over the past 6 or so years. We'll talk about that when we come back to the Point. Welcome back to the Point. This morning we're talking with two members of Congress, one Republican, one Democrat, about a particular effort that they have in common. It's something called 21st Century Cures. Representative Fred Upton and Representative Diana DeGette are working together to try to come up with a way that would have the government more quickly approve procedures and devices, as well as new drugs and treatments for people with diseases across the board. It could be a big change in the way things happen here in the United States, but one of the questions I had was, how do a Republican and Democrat get together working on the issue that has divided so many in Washington, and that is health care? I want to broach another subject. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I am a political reporter, and so this fascinates me. In the video, I reference a video, we'll show a little bit of that here on the show, but one of the very first things you said is, look, we don't agree on everything. And all I can think of is I'm sitting with a Democrat and with a Republican talking about health care solutions. And over the past few years, Democrats and Republicans have not always agreed on health care solutions. I referenced the Affordable Care Act. But yet, here you are. So talk to me from the standpoint of you as being the chairman or you being associated. How do you get to this point when there have just been some ugly fights in Washington over health care in general?
Well, if you want me to go first, I have always been, when I was first elected, I had a member of our leadership, a colleague from Illinois, who said, you're a Republican. For your lifetime, we've been in the minority, and two things are going to happen. You're either going to get beat or your idea is going to get stolen. So I have always embarked on what can we do to working together. We have a lot of good ideas together. And so as chairman of this committee, which has jurisdiction over lots of things, I have always taken the approach that I want to work with both sides of the aisle to get things done. And I know that when we do, which is more often by far than not, you can't stop us from getting that bill passed on the House floor and maybe reaching the president's desk. So whether it's telecommunications policy or trade or certainly health or you name the issue, we're always working and communicating with each other. We may not always agree for sure, but at the end of the day, more often than not, we've got a bill that passes by a pretty good margin in our committee and then sets the stage for what we do on the House floor.
I think that same member also once said, as a Republican, you're going to go to work and lose every day, but we'll discuss that later. Let's talk about it from your perspective, because obviously, having been in the majority, going back into the minority, a lot of changes, there's a fair amount of pressure in Washington on both parties, but here is this bipartisan cooperation.
Well, it's no secret I'm in my 10th term in Congress, and so of that 20 years, I've been in the majority 4 years. And before that, I was in the minority in the state legislature. So I'm a Westerner. I'm very practical. I know how to work with people, and I like to work with people. Fred is right. Everything he says about his views as chairman, he really does try to work across the aisle. I do think that the idea of bipartisanship has been lost over the years, and I think this may be the first big experiment in regaining bipartisanship. I'm really excited about it. And I will say there are naysayers on both sides. I'm sure you hear it, Fred, but I have Democrats come to me and they say, don't let them take advantage of you. And I'm sure they come to you and say, don't let them take advantage of you. They're wily. So you just have to have that level of personal trust and commitment to the issue. We say all the time, disease doesn't just strike Democrats or Republicans. It strikes every family in this country, and the solutions are not partisan solutions.
That's a fascinating insight when you talk about this, and I want you to weigh in on this too. But you two are working together, despite whatever differences you have on other issues, and you've obviously come to a consensus here. But you still have members of your party saying, "Wait a minute, you got to watch out for him." Do you have some of your colleagues come to you?
Oh, sure I do.
Yeah?
Oh, sure I do. You get attacked, you get sacked and burned by folks of all political different stripes. But at the end of the day, you got to say, why am I doing this? It's to advance the ball. It helps in this particular case. Certainly, I think every family. No family's not going to be impacted by what we do at some point, for sure. Everybody's got some, family history, and my mom's a cancer survivor, as an example. I mean, I can go, the list is a long one. But, for the last year and a half, we have diligently been working on this, taking ideas that have been truly bipartisan from both sides, leaders on both sides, trying to fashion a bill that will really make a difference for folks. And I'm convinced that we'll get there.
Fred has the power as a House chairman to just ram a bill through the House. They could ram a bill through the House, and then what could happen? The Republicans would vote for it, the Democrats would vote no. Then it would go over to the Senate to an uncertain fate. But then, if it became partisan like that, President Obama would veto it. And then where would we be? We would have made an issue that is at its core an issue that affects all Americans into a partisan fight. So why not actually try to pass something and succeed? And that's why it's been what Fred has done, which is to involve Democrats and Republicans, but also the administration and even the Senate in this debate. That's what's been so amazing.
And even last week, the president signed into law. In fact, earlier this week, Diane and I, tomorrow, but you're going to air this later, we're going to be with the president this week, talking about what we did on the doc fix. I mean, this not only saved the medical profession that treats Medicare patients, helped community health centers, but frankly, it helped every senior, because the doctors weren't going to see Medicare folks knowing that their reimbursement for whatever service they provided was going to be cut by 22%. We passed that bill in our committee last Congress, 51-0. And finally got it through. The president signed it. We had 392 votes in the House last month, and in the Senate last week, 92 votes. Very good achievement that was clearly bipartisan every step of the way. And Speaker Boehner and former Speaker Pelosi worked together with us and the relevant committees to really get it done. So it's, maybe it's a new day, thank goodness, and one that we're particularly proud of.
Let's talk about this bill. Where are we with it now? Where does it need to go? What is your confidence level with it?
I feel pretty good. I sat down with our leadership this last week. They're excited about where we are. We're hoping to actually formally introduce it before probably the end of this month, the very beginning of next month. We're going to move it through the committee, I think on a fairly fast track. I'm a regular order guy, which means we're going to have a hearing, subcommittee, full committee, get it approved. And the leadership tells us that they'll be ready as soon as we are, which probably looks in June. And we're not too far with the Senate behind us either. Your
colleagues on the committee are largely in favor, you think?
Yeah, we've been working with the ranking Democrat on the full committee, Frank Pallone from New Jersey, and Jean Green, who's the ranking Democrat on the health subcommittee. They're in on the discussions, and so far we still have some issues that we need to resolve, but we are optimistic that we're going to be able to do that. The stakes are too high.
You have served in the state legislature, as you point out, and you've been in the House both in the majority and the minority. You have been in the majority and the minority in the House. You both know your way around this a little bit. What have you learned, if anything, from this exercise and working on something that really is, it may be a little hard for people to grasp, but this really changes the paradigm for health care for, as I said earlier, potentially everybody in the nation, if not a lot of people around the globe. What have you learned from this exercise working with the chairman?
Well, I think I would say, number one, don't be afraid to think big. And number two, especially in a complicated area like biomedical research, get your facts first, which is what we've done. And this is how we've learned that there's so much consensus out there in the world to be able to make us do this.
And what about you? Because you are also tasked with some other big issues. You've got that's a big committee, and you have a purview over a lot of things, everything from airbags and switches on vehicles, and even years ago with tires and all of those things you have to deal. But this is what you chose to champion. So what has it, if anything?
Well, it underscores my belief in a great staff. First of all, we have the best members. I mean, you know, we all say we're on the best committee, but I really do think that we are. It is a real challenge to even get your name put forward to serve on our committee on either side of the aisle. People work for years to get on our committee. There's only limited spots. You've got to, you know, I work big time. So we have very talented members that are smart. On our side, it's viewed as an A committee, so you cannot serve on another committee because your focus is just there. And I got to say that our attendance at hearings, it's pretty much 100% on both sides on every issue, 6 subcommittees. But the staff has really been terrific. Yes. I mean, they see how committed I am to the overall goal. Let's figure this out, but let's listen. Let's just listen to the Van Andels in terms of, you know, the great health research in the Michigans and the Denvers and the MITs and the former directors, people who really do have a better understanding than we certainly did coming into it. Still, at the end of the day, I mean, they're the PhDs and others. But let's listen to the companies like Pfizer and Stryker and Perrigo, just Michigan companies, let alone, you know, the rest of the world. And then let's, you know, show that we have a heart too with all these different patient groups who, you know, maybe they got a loved one, a child, maybe a parent, whatever it is. Bingo, you guys can do something. We have now confidence in you, and let's pick up that ball and carry it and see if we can't get it done. And I got to applaud the White House too. You know, they have been very helpful. The FDA, the NIH, HHS, the president talked about precision medicine in his State of the Union address. We will both be talking to the president this week about where we are, and we know that he cares about getting this thing done too. And our goal is to get it signed by him before the end of the year.
As I said at the top of the show, bipartisanship does happen in Washington. And of course, we hear much more often about the strife between Republicans and Democrats. As you heard Congressman Upton say, they talked with the president about their plan this week, and they do anticipate a full passage in the House and Senate and possible signature by the president sometime later this year. We're back with another pressing issue right here in Michigan. We'll talk about that next. To the Point. In less than 2 weeks, you'll be asked to go to the polls to decide a big issue here in the state of Michigan. It's about the roads, and it's about more than just the roads, as has been pointed out by several opponents of Proposal 1. The ballot initiative that would raise the sales tax to 7%, change the way gasoline is taxed, and try to help fund our crumbling roads is controversial. And right now, it's impossible to know exactly how you will decide. But next week on 24-Hour News 8, I have a series of reports that I hope will clarify the issue. If you've already decided how to vote, and particularly if you haven't, I hope you'll join us as we discuss Proposal 1. What does it really do? Where does the money really go? What are the opponents saying about the plan, and what do those who support it say it will do? All of that's next week on 24-Hour News 8, and next Sunday morning we'll discuss it again on To the Point.